to the Bayview Podcast with hosts Andrew Clark and Chris Emery. This is designed to be a discussion on all things life and faith. We hope this serves as a weekly resource and encouragement to you.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Bayview Podcast. My name is Andrew. I'm one of your hosts, joined as always by the Christopher Emery.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm doing well, man. Doing really, really good. I was actually just outside, and the sun was shining.
Yeah, it's awesome.
It is pretty awesome. This sounds super petty and small because sometimes that's what I am.
Mm-hmm.
But I was pretty excited, not just for the good it felt, but I finally broke down weeks and weeks ago and got my first pair of prescription sunglasses.
Nice.
I have not had a single, in fact, it might have been a month now. I have not had a chance to put them on. And I walked outside and I got in my car. I was so excited. It was like Christmas morning all over again. I'm like, I get to wear them. Anyway, so I'm pretty excited. So I'm flying high because I got to wear my new prescription sunglasses. So yeah, rock on.
Yeah, I love that for you, bud.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I feel your excitement translating. I feel it across the table, man. I think this is like this mutual celebration thing. So you're having a baby soon, and I got prescription sunglasses.
Yeah.
So yeah. If you're still with us, if you have not turned us off at this point, because you're like, okay, I checked these guys out. Nope, dip. Hey, thanks for being with us. We're excited to have you here on the Bayview Podcast today. Today we're kind of picking up where we've been going, and that is kind of follow up to what we talk about on the weekends, and so a little bit of a deeper dive. And if you were with us last week, you know that we just jumped into an 8-week session on just relationships and all the aspects and types and different demographics of that. And today we want to focus on communication. We talked a lot about some of that godly communication at all levels. And while Andrew and I have plenty to offer on probably how to not do it well, I don't know. I think I'm good at that. We also felt like it'd be good to bring somebody in that might be able to give us more of a professional perspective.
Yeah, exactly. And we picked a good one. So, man, this guy, Stephen Scott, husband, father, pastor, counselor, man of many hats and many talents.
Renaissance man.
Yeah, Renaissance man, really. Thanks for joining us. How are you?
Well, I feel like I'm going to probably add a lot that you guys were just talking about, that whole like what not to do. Mm-hmm. So hopefully people don't tune out because of that. But I do think that both from a biblical perspective and even from a clinical perspective, like communication, we do it everywhere. Mm-hmm. We do it with everybody. We do it with our mouths. We do it with our body language, like, the looks on our faces, and it's important that I think from a church level, we understand the importance of communication. Why do we communicate? What do we communicate? How do we communicate it? Certainly we know the biggest message to communicate, right? Yep. But then inside of all of the different layers of relationships that we have, so in my life, I've got my relationship with Jesus first, right? And there's communication in there. Then there's the relationship with my wife, certainly the relationship with my kids. Then I've got colleagues, I've got friends, I've got clients that I meet with. I'm literally a professional communicator, which is so ironic because as much as I can, I try to get out of communicating.
Yes.
So you're not a guy that comes to a dinner party and just takes over the table and just talks and talks until your wife is elbowing you in the side to be quiet? No,
I'll interject once in a while, but I'm definitely a listener.
Okay.
I enjoy observing people and it's fun. I do enjoy communicating. I enjoy communicating more probably on like this level than on the big level.
Sure.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm glad you guys invited me here. Also, I have how do I word it? It's nerdy, okay? But I have magnets in the corners of my glasses.
Yes.
And so I have sunglasses that I can literally just kind of go and it clips in, and it looks cool to like, I don't know, 4-year-olds. It looks cool to 4-year-olds.
It does. And so, and this may be a shameless plug for products. So this is Bunny Trail. Are those Echo? Is that the brand name of those? Echo?
I'm not even sure.
All right. So I was aware of those, and one of my brother-in-laws has those, and they looked cool. Like they weren't like the old grandpa clip-ons, you know. They like also have the hinges that flip up if you need to. They looked cool, but the place I do, they don't carry them. And I was really bummed because that's what I was wanting to get, because it's like carrying 2 pairs of glasses is kind of a bit of a nuisance. It's like, well, if I have the magnet, and so I was looking for those, and I still might go after those as well, because I like your glasses, and those would be cool sunglasses as well. So, yes, thanks for that plug.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
if you are listening and you have any connection to Echo or Eco sunglasses and glassware, we'll plug you shamelessly. So just hook me up.
I gotta get on this.
You gotta get on this, yeah.
I feel behind the time.
Yeah,
when you're old enough to have to wear glasses.
Do they have contacts that are like sunglass contacts?
Sunglasses? That'd be kind of dope.
Yeah,
That'd
just
be cool.
take them in and out in your car.
That'd be cool. No, I think changing. I mean,
transition.
We changed topics.
That.
I do think that, man, I think Steven's a good one to have on for this, though, because even though Steven is always very clear of not wanting to be a communicator, he's one of my favorite people I've known for quite a while to sit and talk with.
Cool.
And so I think just now, even, Steven, you played the role of pastor, and you still are very much a pastor within the church setting, but now you are in that counseling, and you do a lot of marriage counseling or one-on-one counseling, and really what you see in that, and you obviously know more in this, but a lot of it is, how are you talking to someone? How are you communicating with someone? And even doing pre-marriage counseling, I know that's a big thing that you would hit on. I know Chris does, I do, where it's all going to come back to communication. So I think very much like this, you're a great guest to have on for this. And yeah, it's going to be good.
I agree. Thanks. And I think really the area that we want to dive into really would be more about the communication that happens within our most intimate relationships. Because many of us don't have a problem being cordial or nice to those outer realms. The strangers, usually we're fine saying hi or good morning. I mean, those aren't the ones I think we struggle with the most. I will say this. I literally was just at the store getting a Celsius. And if you're a Celsius rep, we'll take free there too. We're just plugging, baby. Plugging. Awesome. Eventually we're going to have products. And I'm walking up to the self-checkout register, and literally I walk up, and the guy right next to me says, "Hey, you were supposed to call me 2 weeks ago." And it caught me off guard. I look at him, I'm like, I do not know this guy at all. Like, it just totally caught me off guard. And I kind of chuckled. I'm like, well, my bad. Just like, what happened? And then he's like, oh, I'm just kidding. I thought that'd get your attention. And I'm like, oh, that's funny. I was like, it would be the first time. Haha. And I'm thinking like, I still don't know who this was. Now, he may attend our church and recognize me. I didn't recognize him.
Sure.
But the thing is, I wasn't rude to him. It wasn't like I struggled with those communication. It wasn't like, hey, shut your mouth when you're talking to me.
Yeah.
Those aren't the areas. So it's the areas that are there. It's those people we're close to, and this is where I think I'd like to get a lot of your insight. Is like, as we are more comfortable, do we struggle with healthy communication more, or maybe poor communication habits? And so maybe how does that work? Because Sunday we talked a little bit about, and you already mentioned it. We talked about the 7-38-55 rule of 7% is verbal, 38% is tone, and 55% is body language. So. That's certainly a big part of it all. But, I don't know. We don't have a specific agenda other than as you do this professionally and as you've experienced it just through the life as a pastor, husband, and counselor, what are some of the challenges you've seen happen what are some of the communication challenges that you see commonly, affecting relationships?
Yeah, so some of the unhealthy markers, right, for communication. Well, I think the first thing to understand is with communication you have, let's say it's just between two people, right? You've got the sender and then you've got the receiver. The sender, sometimes I struggle being the sender, but the sender has to think the thought, and then they've got to put words to the thought, and then they send it. The receiver takes it, and then they have to translate it, and then they're going to respond, right? Well, if you get the wires crossed from here to here, and you send it, and then they respond to it, well, now we're potentially, we're going down rabbit trails, and it doesn't actually have anything to do with the original intent of the communication. Let's say we send the correct message, but then there's misinterpretation based on the translation. Now the same thing's happening, especially if you add disagreement to the conversation. We're trying to resolve a disagreement. If I don't translate something right, but then I go 100 miles an hour in this direction, that's a long way to back up, and I usually end up having to make a lot of apologies before we get back to the original intent of the conversation.
Right.
And so one of the major pitfalls is just clarity in the communication, right? How do I know I'm sending the right message? How do I know that they're receiving it if they never give me any actual verbal feedback on it? Yeah. Now, in our normal day-to-day conversations, or when we're having, I don't know, positive communication interactions, that's probably less important that we correctly translate everything. But if we know we're entering into some sort of conflict or some sort of disagreement, man, we need to be crystal clear on what we're communicating, and so there's like the reflective listening. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but that's the so if Andrew and I are communicating, I'm going to send the message. It's almost like a half circle this way. Andrew's going to reflect back what he hears. So what I hear you saying is, and then da-da-da-da-da. Yeah. So that's him sending it back to me. Now I have an opportunity to say, yes, that is exactly what I meant. Now he can formulate his response. And we know, because it's a conflictual type conversation, right, we know that we're on the same topic. We're not talking about two different things. Yeah. So I think that's super important, and it gives me the feeling of like, okay, he actually heard me. Yeah, he heard me. Like now I feel a little bit validated. Like, oh, you were listening. Mm-hmm. There was a light bulb moment years ago. I'm a really slow learner, so it took about 7 or 8 years for me to figure this out in marriage. So with my wife, she is a verbal processor. I am an internal processor. Okay. So she will process things out. We'll go like, let's say, in a circular motion with the conversation, and she'll get to the end, and then she's looking at me for response. I got nothing because I haven't thought about it yet. I haven't had an opportunity to process it really and spit out the formulated thought that I have. Yep. So my silence was taken as, oh, he didn't hear me, and so then we go back in the loop, right? And at one point, and she's not doing anything wrong. I'm the one that wasn't communicating and all of that. But at one point, God's grace really like came down on me. He took so much pity and mercy on me, and he threw me the phrase out of the blue in order to not engage in that cycle again, to look at her and say, wait, so what you're saying is whatever it was that she was saying. Yeah. And then I looked at her and I said, okay, give me 5 minutes. Yeah. Good. Which then she was like, okay, like it was new. Yep. She gave me, I didn't even need 5 minutes, but I just needed some space to process it and then be able to, give her a response, and then we could continue the conversation. So I think the clarity is super important, and miscommunication happens because we don't pause at important times to try to figure out, like, wait, are we talking about the same thing? Yeah. We could be arguing. You guys probably have done this, where you're arguing with someone, let's just say, and you realize, like, hey, we're arguing the same point. Yeah. Oh, yeah. But we were pretty heated.
We're on the same team.
Yeah. We're actually not disagreeing, yet we're fighting.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, it's the craziest thing. So that miscommunication is a lack of clarity in what actually either was meant to be sent or what was translated in the communication. So most individuals that come in with relationship issues maybe, and they realize somewhere along the lines, like, well, I'm kind of the common denominator in all of my relationship issues. and so they're coming in to try to figure out, what can I change? What do I need to work on in me in order to be maybe better in these relationships? Or marriage, like couples that are coming in for marriage counseling. I mean, it could be almost any topic. It could be finances. It could be any topic that they're coming in because there's an issue. And the underlying issue is communication. Mm-hmm. Like, we're going to work on communication no matter what the other issue really is. So
all right, so let's just, you're talking about that, and it sounds, that type of sending, receiving, the clarity, all that is so spot on and makes total sense. And I see how that can be played out with spouses, parents and their children, maybe siblings, certainly maybe even in the workplace. And it sounds super neat and nice and orderly to have a conversation. Andrew and I are going to talk. I'm going to say what I am feeling and thing, and he's going to sit there and listen. And then at some point he'll very calmly say, "This is what I hear you saying. Is that right?" And And if it's not, I'm not going to be offended. I'm going to be very calm and be like, "No, but let me clarify." And we're going to hug it out. And just that sounds super neat and beautiful and a little pie in the sky for most of us. So although that is the goal, what gets in the way? Why is that type of communication so challenging for so many people?
Yeah, usually when we go into, I'm just going to say conflict mode.
Yep.
Right? So we go into conflict mode. Now, we all have beliefs about conflict, right? So growing up in my home, I formed beliefs and ideas about what does conflict equal. And so for me, I always described it, conflict was a tidal wave. It always felt like this dangerous thing that's going to take me out. And I grew up in a very loving home, so this isn't a knock on the structure necessarily. It was just the home that I grew up in. But conflict... to me, I learned that conflict was loud. I learned that conflict was aggressive. Usually what I felt like, this probably wasn't true, but this is what I felt like and formed a belief on, was conflict leads down the road that Stephen is wrong or it's Stephen's fault. And so grow up, I'm going to avoid conflict. That doesn't sound fun. I don't want to loud. I don't want aggressive, and I don't want to engage in something where all roads lead to it's Stephen's fault. I don't think anybody wants that. So what it really comes down to is, what is your belief about conflict? And if you can begin the work outside of conflict to maybe frame a more accurate belief about conflict. If you believe that conflict is just a disagreement where two people are going to treat each other with respect and get to a place of agreement, that sounds awesome. If you believe that conflict can actually lead to trust being built in your relationship versus trust being broken down in your relationship, that sounds great. I'm going to engage in that because I want to get to truth, or I want to get to the place of agreement. For me, that equals I want to get to peace. Yeah. But if I don't believe that it leads to peace, then I'm a disruptor of conflict. I'm an avoider of conflict. There's all sorts of reasons why I'm not going to engage in conflict. So it really does begin by doing the work outside of conflict to figure out, what do I believe in conflict? Do I believe conflict means, all right, it's time, like one of us is going to win and one of us is going to lose?
Right.
Or, because honestly, if one person wins and one person loses, they both lose.
Yeah.
Right. So the goal isn't to win or lose. The goal is to get to a place of agreement. Where are we unified, actually? That's the goal. Sometimes in conflict, we take the stance of, well, now we're going to engage in a debate, and we're going to see who's the better debater here. Mm-hmm. If we did that, I would lose every single conflict because my wife is so much a much better debater than me, for sure. So I think it has to start, if we want to be able to engage where our defenses aren't like, oh, here we go, I'm building the wall. And I always envision like two pirate ships pulling up next to each other, and I'm not necessarily looking to sink the other ship, but I'm just going to cause a little damage. If they fire at me, I'm going to fire back at them. Right? Yep. So now we're just shooting cannonballs back and forth at each other. If that's what we believe conflict is, then we're probably not going to be able to engage in so what I hear you saying is, we will have defenses raised up, and that will prevent us from doing that.
Well, what I've seen over the years through even in my own personal experiences and in the pastoral counseling that we've offered is that, I love your analogy of two pirate ships. I see oftentimes like the two ships will pull up next to each other, and the intent at that moment is to not fire. So you start with verbal insults, like if they're gonna like, oh, I'm a better pirate, but then it keeps escalating. And so you go from maybe verbal things to maybe throwing rocks and then maybe shooting guns, and then the cannons come out. And it seems eventually it reaches a point where one person pulls out the biggest cannon they can to just end the conflict, but the only path is through destruction.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's where so much damage is done. Even if those couples, and again, this could be marriage, parent, sibling, whatever, even if that conflict comes to rest and you move on, that damage is there and it carries forward. And that's where so oftentimes by the time, I would imagine you see this a lot, by the time they reach you, by the time they're like, hey, I've gone to my pastor, this is clearly beyond their pay grade, now let's go to a professional. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're probably working through so much debris.
My favorite is at the end of the session we're talking, and I usually, I don't know, some comment about, I'm glad that you guys are here, and I'm trying to cast some hope. Because I do see hope. Like, I mean, Jesus can change everybody's heart, right? Yep. So I'm trying to cast some hope, and the husband looks at me and says, well, this is cheaper than a divorce. So that, I mean, that's sometimes I was at least glad he put it into words. Yeah. Then I knew where he stood, and they actually, I mean, the last time I saw them together was out in the, sometimes I say out in the wild, right? I see people out in public here. And they were still together, and they did work through a lot of stuff in order to get to a place where they could actually communicate and not do all the name calling and stonewalling and just the things that are destructive and for marriage specifically, but they're destructive to any relationship.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. So, I don't know. What are your thoughts? I mean, I don't want to dominate.
We could have ended it after your first description of talking with your wife in the circles and stuff. That was super helpful for me. I guess I look at communication, especially amongst married couples or parents and whatnot, and you kind of already alluded to it with conflict, like what we've already kind of created in our minds that conflict is. How much do you believe in, like, what we bring in affects our communication? Like, is that problem number one? Is that tends to be the biggest issue you see is what preconceived ideas, what assumptions do I have? Like, I guess that seems maybe basic, but are you seeing that's kind of the factor?
Yeah, I usually do like to start with like family of origin stuff. So this is the environment that we grew up in. Mm-hmm. So nature versus nurture. This is all the nurture stuff, right? We all grew up in a home, in an environment, and we learned things. Like, our parents were an example. This is a scary thing for us parents, right? Yeah. We're an example whether we mean to be or not. We're either a positive example or we're showing them what not to do.
100%.
But we kind of get this default mode programmed into us, and we don't even realize it's happening.
Yeah.
And we take that out into the world, and that's how we begin relationships. That's how we begin, like, our thought process around almost everything, even our faith, our thought process around faith. Yeah. Well, why do I believe in Jesus? I don't know. I haven't really, because I went to church my whole life, and that's what the pastor said, or whatever the reason may be. But somewhere as our brain is starting to fully develop there in our early 20s, that front prefrontal cortex is the logic, it's the reasoning, it's challenging us to actually understand why we believe what we believe, because we're going to have to actually put some evidence sometimes with certain individuals behind what we believe. So when it comes to communication, all that stuff is in there. If it never gets challenged, if there are certain points that never get challenged until all of a sudden you're married and maybe the first time you have a kid, and then all of a sudden you find yourself talking to your wife on a topic that you've never discussed before, and you realize you're on two opposite ends of the spectrum. That is programmed into you usually from the way that you grew up. Yeah. And so there are assumptions that we bring in. It's not bad, but it does create the conflict that we will experience in our marriage the rest of our life, is the fact that we don't even fully understand ourselves. I'm convinced that at age 80, I'm going to learn new things about myself.
Yeah.
And new reasons why I think and behave the way that I think and behave. Yeah. So that's just a growing process, but we do bring it in, and it is programmed into us in our early, our rearing years at home with mom and dad and with siblings and friends and relationships that we had in high school. All that stuff kind of adds to what we take into adulthood and certainly take into our marriage.
Sure. What's a practical response then to challenge that? like what are things I could be doing to like process out, oh, this is how I view conflict, or then this is maybe a healthy way to do it. What is have you seen as a way to kind of not just accept the status quo of like, oh, this is just how I am, but
yeah, I think I'll just continue with conflict,
Mm-hmm.
right? So in conflict, if I notice something rising up in me, that's kind of like, I don't know what it could be. It could be defensiveness, right? I just call it out. That helps eliminate, or at least minimize how much miscommunication is going to take place.
Yeah.
How far down the road I'm going to go with like assumptions. It's gonna slow that process down. So anymore in my marriage, I don't even know why when I say it, but if I start to notice like I'm feeling defensive or I'm feeling anxious, I will like, hey Hannah, like I'm feeling defensive right now, and then it's almost like she goes into Sherlock Holmes mode, and she's like, oh, well when did you notice it? Okay, what did I say? Okay, what did you think I said? Well, how did you interpret that?
Sure.
And that works really well in our marriage. But we're 22 years in, we've actually built a lot of trust to be able to do that with each other. So early on, you really are you're trying to recognize things going on inside of you first, because you can't know what's going on inside of somebody else anyway, unless they tell you.
That's true.
So the goal is I need to get better at identifying the things going on in me, so that then I can communicate those things going on inside of me to my spouse, right? Or even with kids.
Yeah.
Like I didn't grow up in a home where I don't think I ever heard my parents say I'm sorry, which I don't know that that's abnormal. I think most of the people that I work with probably have experienced the same thing. But I remember I remember walking past my father-in-law as he was kneeling down and talking to one of my wife's siblings. And walking past, and he's kneeling down and talking to them, and he said, oh, I'm sorry that I don't even know what he did.
Wow. Yeah.
And I remember going into the living room and looking at my wife and saying, man, your dad must have done something big, because he just said sorry to your sister.
Yeah.
And Hannah was like, he says sorry all the time. Like if he makes a mistake, he says he's sorry.
Wow.
And we have tried to make a point of that. But in our parenting, man, we see a lot of, I can identify more of my triggers in my parenting than I even do in my marriage.
Yeah.
Especially when I see certain behaviors in my kids that are like mine that I don't like.
Yep.
Right. So then there's the insecurity of, I don't want them to do the same thing that I did. Not that they will, but that's my fear. Or triggers of other family members, I'll say, in some of our kids.
Yeah.
And that just creates the need to identify things and be honest and what's going on inside. Like, I'm feeling really defensive right now, and I know that's not your intent.
Right.
Let me step back.
Yeah.
It gets easier as you do it, but when you initially start doing it, most of us don't know how to identify the feelings that we're having, especially us guys.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that's what I've loved about being in, like, going and seeing a therapist, going to counseling, has been for that right there, to discover the triggers, the why do I feel this way. You know, we've talked at length on this podcast in general, like sharing my story of my dad passing and all that, and I noticed, but I didn't know how to respond to it. I remember noticing when my son was first born, very quickly after my father's passing, whenever he would cry, like, even if I was holding him, if I couldn't console him, it like made me angry. And I remember finally going to a counselor and being like, it's a newborn baby, but if it cries and I can't instantly make him stop crying, it like angers me. And just be able to talk that out of like, oh yeah, that's probably tied to your dad. Like there's, to go down the rabbit hole, but to deal with it. But I think that's huge. I think the ability to work out and work through why you're feeling what you're feeling. It reminds me a lot of times when we talk with couples, and this can be amongst friends. I think of even from a coaching standpoint, it can be there's so much here where it's like, I have an expectation, I have a thought, I have a goal, but if I never share that or explain that, I can't be upset about you not coming through. And I think I think I put those two together because I feel this way, And I don't know why, but you haven't done the work to actually make it make sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I kind of hearing that same thing, and I reflect back on my wife and I through the first 7-8 years of our marriage. So much of our poor communication and even in conflict was because we lacked clarity. And I think that I don't remember ever going into a conversation with just the flat out intent of like, I'm going to destroy her in this one. I'm going to win this. But it quickly becomes that as the misunderstandings or miscommunication, it makes you defensive. We never stopped to do that. And I think we quickly both got to the point of, well, I don't feel heard. I don't feel understood, and I don't feel valued. And it just kept perpetually building and building and building. And it wasn't until we went to marriage counseling and just saw the huge gift of having a third party in the room that taught us how to communicate with clarity. Yeah. And that was the first time I remember I said something, and I don't remember what it was. And the counselor asked my wife, now, what did you hear him say? And what she repeated was nowhere near what I said. At least it wasn't the intent of what I said. And again, 50-50 shared on that. But then to have him be like, well, actually, that's not what he said. I heard him saying this, and it was what I was trying to say. Yeah. And now it went both ways, like the exercise went both ways. And recognizing that so much of it was just that. We didn't understand how to even bring clarity in. We didn't understand how to come in with the original intent of the conversation to end in peace, to end in an agreement or reconciliation, whatever that may be. We just had different agendas. And I think those agendas were bringing past hurts in of like, I've got to be heard. And I know, like my wife will say that she grew up in a home, and I've witnessed this for 29 years now, where everyone talks at once. Doesn't matter. They're not fighting. They're just talking all at once. And everyone wants to be heard. So what happens is it just escalates. Volume escalates. And eventually, like, you're sitting there, it's like, here's all of the females on that side of the family, and they're talking at the top of their voices, and nobody's listening, and the guys are hiding in the corner of the fetal position, right? So then I begin to understand a little bit of what you're saying. That, well, she brings that in of, like, she was the baby of the family, and she was never heard. She was never heard, so I had to learn how to, and I'm an out loud processor. I'm also a very fast processor. I envy those of you, because you both represent to me men who are patient in your processing. You take your time to give it good thought before you speak. I am ready, shoot, aim, right? Yeah. I'm going to talk a mile a minute, and I'll figure it out later on. Yep. But that's had to become a very learned thing within our marriage, and it took us going through some very difficult times to find that.
Even just I think back to what Stephen said and what you're speaking to as well. The ability to communicate how you process, like that is so valuable in any relationship. My wife and I, we still struggle with it because she's an out loud processor, and I've been a jerk many times where I feel like she's starting to circle. I'm like, oh, you're circling again, like we've already. But I've never made the comment of, I've heard you. Like Steve said, I'm hearing this is what you say. Can I think on it? Because that has happened a couple times where we've done that, and it's been the best conversation we ever had. But I've never taken the time to like communicate what's actually going on. And so it's like then it's there is the confusion and miscommunication that happens because
and the assumption. So again, like what you were saying, she assumes you're not listening because you haven't responded verbally. Yeah, and now that brings in more assumptions. Bring so much conflict as well.
I'm the problem. It's me.
All roads end that you're wrong.
There you go.
Yep. All right. Well, this has been the Bayview. Like
husbands, go home and apologize. Have a great evening.
I guess within that, then, Stephen, how have you seen? What's the best way to communicate expectations? What does that look like?
Yeah, the first thing, I think we all need to admit that we have expectations we're not even aware of. I think you had kind of alluded to that a little bit as well. Like we do have expectations we're not aware of. And so it might be something that's kind of benign, like we're going into the weekend. I have expectations of, certain projects maybe I want to get done. Yeah. And then my wife says, hey, do you want to go to the grocery store together and we'll get the groceries for the week? well, of course I want to spend time with her. And so I'm going to go to the grocery store, and we do that. And then we do one other little thing here. And then before I know it, I get to the end of the weekend and I didn't get any of the stuff done, and I'm kind of cranky about it. Well, I had expectations and I never voiced them, and I never even got to the place where they really registered in my head that if I don't get these done at the end of the weekend, I'm probably going to be disappointed in myself.
Sure.
We have expectations that we might not be aware of. We certainly have expectations that we don't voice.
Yeah.
And I think if it's important for us because we're going to try to make that happen, then it's important that we verbalize that expectation, especially to the people in our home.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
so even sometimes it's certainly with our wife, but or with our spouse, but the even with the kids sometimes, like, hey, it's important that you understand I'm not going to be available between this time and this time, even though I'm in the house.
Sure.
That's good.
That way you can get the things done that, you need to get done. And maybe you need to change your expectations because there's other things that are priority, but at least you've spoken those things out. My wife and I think it was this last summer, we're just going for a drive on like a Sunday afternoon. When your kids get older, it's nice. You can just like, hey, peace out. We're going to be gone for a few hours.
Can't wait.
So nice.
It's glorious.
Yeah. So we go for this drive, and I think she I don't know how we got on the topic, but she challenged me a little bit, and she did it in a very loving way, but she challenged me with this idea of, hey, I don't want to be the one making all the decisions. And I'm thinking, what do you mean? You're the one making all the decisions. I'm the one making all the decisions.
Yeah.
It would be nice if I wasn't the one making all the decisions. And so when we go down this process of talking out, well, why do you think you make all the decisions? Why do I think I make all the decisions? And what happens is, I'm really good at this, is I'm asking questions and I'm gathering information. I know what my thoughts are, and I'm comparing my thoughts to her thoughts, and then, okay, we'll do what you said. I've never verbalized my thoughts, so all she's hearing all these years is we'll just do what you want to do.
Sure.
So of course that's why she feels like she's making all the decisions.
Yeah.
Every once in a while I might push back. So there are miscommunications that we're making as well. So I think both of those things. There's expectations that we haven't verbalized, and then there's probably assumptions that we have. Just look for the areas in our communication where we continue to have, I don't know, not conflict, where it's tense, right? Where it's like, oh, I don't even want to talk about that again.
Yeah. So how about this? This is a common one in my family, and so I'm sure we're not alone. How about start here, because we want to tee up for success. Put this into practice when you're trying to decide where you want to go out to eat. Is that going too far? Is that going too far?
That's a tough one, though.
Because I know, like, I'm laughing about it, but at the same time, it's like, this happens all the time. Like, hey, all right, let's go grab something. Well, what do you want? I'll ask that to my wife. I don't care, whatever. Well, that's not true, because she does care. Because there's several restaurants that I know are on her no-no list. So you can't say you don't care.
Sure.
Because otherwise, and so admittedly, and sweetheart, I know you're probably listening, and so you can't use this against me because the Bible says you can't. 1 Corinthians 13.
Yeah.
Sometimes it irritates me when that happens, and so I intentionally start rattling off all the restaurants that I know are on her no list to prove my point.
Big Macs it is.
To prove my point, right? So I'm setting up the conflict, right? Because I'm going to prove my point. But it is like something as simple as that can oftentimes, it's rare, but there's probably been one or two times over the course of the last 29 years where that conversation has gotten so far down the path of frustration that we've just given up and gone home. It's like we can't even clarify our expectations and clarity on a restaurant. Yeah. And so what are some ground level tips? Like nobody's going to fix it overnight. So what would you say? All right, here's a couple things to begin putting into practice to begin bringing out this healthy type of communication.
Yeah, I think if it seems like your communication at home tends to be really, really tense and it really goes into conflict battle mode pretty quickly, what I encourage couples to do is to get like a stack of those index cards, and when that happens, somebody to pull out the index card, write out the problem on it, and then set it on the table, and then don't sit across from each other because you don't want to kind of look like you're the enemy, right? But you are facing this problem together, right? So you're actually sitting facing the problem.
Same side of the table.
Yep, same side of the table.
Good, that's good.
And you're looking at the note card, and this is the problem that we have to solve. It also keeps us on track because we can go 15 different ways, right? So then we get the solution to that, and we can just write it at the bottom, and boom, now we're good. And then at the end, I think it's also really super important to make sure, like, are we good? Whatever it looks like to finalize that conversation, so that you're walking away both feeling like you both have won. You're unified. You're on the same team. You certainly have an enemy, right? He's that would love to get be that wedge. But you're on the same team. You're unified. You feel good moving forward. So that's a good one. If it seems like that's really hard to do because fighting isn't fair, then I always suggest, okay, well, then I want you to write out rules for engagement, right? So these are going to be rules for fighting. And I like them worded in the positive versus the negative, like if you can avoid writing like, we don't do this, I like it better when it's written, we do this. So we show respect to each other. Sometimes people though have to write out like, we will not call each other names.
Yep.
We will not yell at each other.
Yeah.
But if you write that out, save it as a document, and then have a stack of those, then instead of the 3x5 card, you take one of those sheets of paper, set it down between the two of you with space at the bottom. You write out what the problem is, and then those are like your guardrails to get to the answer of that problem. I think that one is that one's pretty good.
My wife and I actually went through that exercise years ago, and we have our written rules of engagement. Yeah. I don't know that we have the paper anymore. I think one of us burned it during a fight one time, but that wasn't on the rules. We didn't say you can't burn the rules.
It was cool.
But yeah, like we have those. We have them. We have the understanding. We don't call each other. We don't tell each other that you're acting like your mom or your dad.
Yep.
Because that lights the fire. Really, anything we know will escalate the conversation. I'm not allowed to just walk away from the conversation. That's my go-to move. Throw my hands up, walk away. We do our best. We're not allowed to interrupt. That's a tough one. And it's all in an effort to try and bring clarity, and ask questions and keep it de-escalated. But yeah, I fully support that. I think the rules of engagement, I have in my premarital counseling, I have the couples do that. Yep. What are the things that will derail your communication? And we know what's going to hurt the other person.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
No one knows it better.
So back to the pirate ships, right? Yeah. When the cannons are blazing and I need to bring out the biggest cannon, I know what that is. Yeah. I know exactly what I could say.
Yeah. We're living across enemy lines at all times, so we understand better than anyone what's going to hurt. Yeah. And I wanted to say this just because in my mind, and I'm thinking of like younger couples and some of that kind of stuff, and what you're sharing, like the idea of pulling a card out or the idea of writing something out, and it's like maybe if you're listening and that sounds a little corny, to be fair, my thought goes, but if you care, it's not going to be. Like if your marriage means something to you,
I agree.
Like anything like this is going to be totally worth it.
Yeah.
And sometimes like you said, maybe initially you need to, but hopefully those become so ingrained in you guys and you trust each other enough. They don't need to pull the actual paper out. But I think if an exercise is going to help, it's worth it.
I agree. And I mean, not to maybe be unfair in how we paint this picture. My guess is if we're talking, especially within marriage relationships, it's probably the husband that's going to push back on some of that, right? He's going to push back because, you read this in Cosmopolitan or Pinterest or whatever. And so I would encourage, guys, listen, if your wife comes to you and wants to put something in place like that, embrace it. Just put your pride down. Yep. Just do it. Try if your marriage matters. Yeah. Then you'll try anything like that. Yep. And I think that's a huge part. And I think that also goes back to if you're listening and you've tried some of these things and the little tips and tricks just aren't doing it, it may be time to seek professional help. And counseling, I think when I was growing up, counseling had such an air of don't tell anybody you're going. Only you got to really be broken if you're going to counseling. Oh my goodness! Yeah. And that what a horrible view of one of the greatest resources available to any of us. If you are going to counseling or you are willing to go to counseling, that's the most courageous, well done move I can think of.
Yeah, 100%.
Is go get it, go do it. And my advice would be this: do it before it gets terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, how much of your days would be enjoyable if everybody came in for maintenance rather than crisis?
Oh, that would be amazing. That would be amazing. I know on that topic, when my wife and I got married, before we got married, and I don't think it was part of our pre-marriage counseling. I think it was just something that we had talked about together individually or together, but not within any pre-marriage program or counseling or anything. But it was the agreement that if one of us felt that it was necessary to go to counseling, the other one had to go.
Oh, good. So good.
Right. So I might not even agree with it. I might think it's like a big overreaction, whatever, but I still need to go.
Sure.
And then the other idea is I need to willingly go.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So my heart has to be in the right place of, oh, she's hurt.
Yep.
Like if she's saying, hey, we need to go see somebody, she's hurt.
Yep.
I don't want her to be hurt. I'm obviously doing something that hurts her. If I'm not aware of it, which most of the time I think we are, but if I'm not aware of it, I want to become aware of it and I want to make some changes. Or we just need help, working through communication, and she's the one that recognizes it. Or maybe I'm the one that recognizes it.
I think it's super good. I like that.
Yeah, I had a couple who I meet with pretty weekly they just showed up. They said, hey, we want to do this. And I was like, you guys all good? They're like, oh, yeah, we've just been married a couple of years, and we want to start having kids. And we just figured, hey, we've never done this. Like, it'd be nice to sit and just have conversation and just prepare us and set us up for success when things aren't bad.
Right.
And it's like, so I just think like I think the idea of maintenance versus crisis, but the willingness to do it. And they're both on board with like, this is worthwhile, whether we feel like, I'm using air quotes, feel like things are bad or not. It's like, this is worth it.
Well, and it builds a foundation for things to continue to grow and intimacy to grow. It's a good thing to do, not something to be taboo. I'm thinking of, we had some family members, I won't say who it is, and this is like 20 years ago or so, or maybe more. They saved up and bought a brand new car. They bought this brand new little car, and they were so excited about it. And I think it was somewhere around the 35,000 mile mark that someone asked about if they, where they get their oil changes done. And they were like, what? Oil change? Well, yeah, we didn't know we were supposed to do that. 35,000 or more thousand miles in it. So what do you think was going on with the car? Well, there were some issues.
Yeah.
There's some issues. And if we think through that terms, like, well, none of us would ever do that on purpose, right? None of us would ever neglect something if like, well, if I know if I could do this, it'll help in the long run. Yep. Why do we do that with our relationships? And I think that's a great, for me, that's always been a helpful view of it. And my wife and I have been to multiple different short series of marriage counseling when things are fine.
Yeah.
When things are going fine. We've just felt every once in a while the need, and I don't think we ever had an agreement like what you guys did, but I love that if one of you says, let's go, the other should willingly be like, let's go. I think it's fantastic.
That's cool.
I think if couples feel stuck, right? So it might be around a certain topic. Then doesn't matter if they're coming to the church and they want to talk to the pastor. If they're reaching out to a counselor in the area, that's a good time to go to a counselor for sure. Most of the counseling that I do certainly is at like, man, we are like right in the 11th hour.
Wow. Yeah.
Somebody's already pretty much out. The other person's not sure if they're in. They just know they're more in than the other one, But I think if we could utilize counseling even from a maintenance standpoint, then we can do the fun things of like, hey, are you an internal processor or an external processor? Yeah. Little things. They're on their own. They're like tiny little things, but they're really fun because they help us understand ourselves better. And if we're doing that with our spouse, like we're growing our emotional intimacy, right? So, and that's the goal.
Yeah.
I think us guys, when we're, in our 20s and we're getting married, like the idea of intimacy, I don't think we ever put the word emotional in front of that word.
No, it's only sexual.
Right.
Oh yeah, that's all it is.
And I think that only goes so far, right? Emotional intimacy is where all of the goodness and the depth of our relationships really are. If that's going really well, then the other intimacy is also going well.
100%.
Right? So if we're going to put our effort into any kind of intimacy, we want to do it into the emotional intimacy side of our relationship. And doing things like a marriage seminar or whatever it might be, just doing things together. I can't remember the statistic. It was, I'm totally just making this up a little bit based on something that I heard once. It's like an 80% of couples who do something intentional together once a week, like they stay married their whole life, right? And this is probably 18 years ago I heard that. And I don't know that percentage is right, but it was a big high number, right?
Yeah.
So it is the idea of doing something connected, whether you can take dancing class. I'm not going to take dancing class. You can take dancing classes with your wife, but you can go and take cooking classes.
Yeah.
You can get a book and you can do the 5 love languages, whatever it may be. If you're doing something that's helping you understand you and understand your spouse more at the same time, it's just going to be growing.
Yeah.
And that's the maintenance stuff. You can use a professional for that. Certainly. I would love to help people with that. That's fun stuff.
Yeah.
But we can do some of that on our own too if we put in the legwork.
Yeah. I think one exercise, and we'll be wrapping up in a minute, is I've encouraged is, and a book I've used a lot in my marriage counseling is a book, His Needs, Her Needs. And it's something my wife and I were handed to do. And the way they did it is our counselor gave us the book and he gave us each a highlighter. He gave me a blue highlighter, gave her a pink highlighter. And he said, alternate, but one of you read chapter 1. And so, like, say she went first, and he's like, Dory, highlight everything that jumps out at you in that chapter. So it's all in pink. Then it says, now, Chris, you read it, and you highlight everything that jumps out at you in blue. And then together, go back to that chapter, see what's pink, see what's blue, and see what's purple. And it really, for me and her both, like we've discovered, like, wow, she had needs that I was just not aware of, which obviously can translate to expectations and vice versa. It just was a deeper understanding. And so it doesn't have to be that book, but I like I said, I think doing something to be intentional, doing something to invest. And I think one of the best statements I've ever heard and received, I can't even remember who said it, was the best gift I could give my children is a great marriage.
Yeah.
And so many parents are great parents, but they forget to have a good marriage through that whole process. And now you spend, 20, 25 years raising kids. You get to the back end of it and you realize, like, oh man, we don't know each other anymore. And in a lot of the cases, you probably see this, I don't think we like each other anymore because you've just, you just checked out. And I know there's other things, and we've got some topics coming up on parenting and some other things like that. So, man, this has been super good. Not to put you on the spot, so you have free to say no, but man, I'd love to have you back at some point on this series if we could work that out down the road here. We have some other topics coming up. I think you've just brought a ton of wisdom to it, man. So you can say no if you want. You don't have to answer right now.
I will answer. I will say this was fun. I will come back and listen to how you guys have failed again. It'll be great.
Let's go.
Yeah.
This has been a great counseling session. I've
that's
loved
the
it.
safe counselor's answer right there.
Taking so many mental notes.
That was a test. What a good professional answer. Yeah. I will give you this. I will say this was fun. So awesome. No, seriously, man. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks, man. It's been awesome. Just having, getting to know you and your family, but having you here. So thanks for your input. So, if you haven't done so, click subscribe, whatever platform you're listening on. I want to make sure you don't ever miss an episode. We're going to be back next several weeks. We've got other things. We've got topics on singleness, parenting, conflict resolution, everything that we can think of with relationships. And so be back here each week. And until then, we will see you next time around. We're out of here.